The First Minister has said Sinn Féin is open to amending Stormont's climate change legislation in an attempt to push forward with construction of the much-delayed A5 road scheme. The £1.7 billion upgrade will connect Ochnacloy on the Tyrone-Monaghan border with the northwest. The 58-mile project was first announced in 2007 and approved by Stormont ministers back in October 2024. But a court ruled the Department for Infrastructure plan didn't comply with climate change targets. The issue's still caught up in the courts, but let's discuss it now with the SDLP's Matthew O'Toole, who's Stormont's opposition leader, of course, and Mal O'Hara, who's the leader of the Greens in Northern Ireland. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining me today. Matthew O'Toole, first of all, should this scheme go ahead? Because it's been dubbed the most dangerous road in Ireland, with 57 people killed on it since 2006.
Yes, it has to go ahead. I think this is really important. I also think it's important to say, Mark, to be clear about our position. We don't think you should change the targets in the Climate Change Act, so we agree, I presume, with Mal on that. What we have suggested is that if the appeal done by the Minister currently is not successful, then we should consider introducing something called an overriding public interest test into the legislation, which would allow in very narrow and specific circumstances, such as the A5, where life-saving infrastructure is needed. This exists already in the EU Habitats Directive, that there could be effectively an overriding clause, an overriding public interest. That's different from junking the targets, which we don't believe in. But this road must be built, and it's not about a kind of Jeremy Clarkson like love of roads for their own sake. It's about saving lives. There are people in Tyrone in particular who have seen family members, particularly young people, die over the last number of years on that road. It can't go on the way it is. But yes, we need to meet our climate targets. Yes, we shouldn't be junking the action to tackle the climate emergency. So what we're suggesting is a narrow change, only if the appeal isn't successful.
Mal O'Hara, you can explain in more detail, but my understanding of the Greens' position is that you think that the safety aspect to this issue can be achieved without delivering the full A5 upgrade.
Yes, indeed, Mark. And I think we think a better use of resource is to the 1.7 billion or more that we have earmarked for the A5. Actually, what we can do is proceed right away with the safety upgrades. And instead of using that money to build an entirely new road, we should be using to reinstate the rail network across the west and prioritise that across the west of Northern Ireland.
But that's a very long-term solution, isn't it?
Well, I think the immediate safety upgrades can be done pretty quickly within a number of years. But I think, Mark, there's a narrative here that's accepted that a new road is the way forward. All the time in Northern Ireland, we hear this cry that we have no financing, no money, there's nothing in the budget, but we can allocate almost 2 billion to this new road. So I would challenge that. But I would also say, Mark, what's really important is that no judge has ever said that the A5 is incompatible with the climate change targets. What the judge has said is that the departments are incompetent and have not put the case forward to say that this can fit within the climate targets.
Yeah, and there needs to be a joined up approach, and the judge wasn't satisfied that exists.
Yes, and also they failed in their modelling for emissions to look at induced traffic from the Republic of Ireland, and also the pre-existing, before the Climate Change Act came in, there were pre-existing legal challenges in terms of people's rights to private property, and that was held in the court as well. So it's not just about the Climate Act, it's actually about a number of issues, primarily about incompetence from the
department. Why isn't that a perfectly acceptable solution? Deliver the safety upgrades, but don't make a bad situation worse as far as climate change is concerned.
I just want to say it is true that the judge has made clear, Mal's right about that climate change targets are not incompatible with delivering this road. If you follow on from that, then you get to the position that this road is necessary and the design is necessary in order to save lives. Look, part of this is process. There's earmarked funding, including from the Irish government, which exists. The plan exists. The planning process has gone through with the road as it is. By far, the most practical way of dealing with this is to deliver this road as planned in order to save lives. And I just have to say this to Mal, with whom I agree on a lot of this stuff, and as an official, as a constructive, robust opposition, we have made environmental protection a huge priority for us, because the North has fallen so far behind in terms of environmental protection, the evidence of which is most obviously in Lough Neagh. But in relation to this road, we cannot underestimate how serious this is, particularly for people west of the Bann and particularly in County Tyrone. So many young lives have been lost. We need to build this road. I'm not gung-ho for building roads for their own sake. I really want to deliver the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review. Nicola Mallon commissioned that review.
But that's a separate issue, isn't it?
It is, but there's a connection too. there is a connection. If the department had been serious and taken seriously its responsibilities to prove, to demonstrate, first of all, to produce a climate action plan, to deal with the obligations in the 2022 Climate Change Act, to prove how this was going to fit in with a broader strategy in terms of emissions reduction, the A5 would have been being built as we speak. So these things are not incompatible. But we do need to isolate the issue of the A5, which needs to be built because lives have been lost and that just can't go on the way it is. I also want a rail line to be built along the old line from Derry to Portadown to connect on to Dublin. That's where we should be.
Yeah, there isn't money. I mean, a lot of people will be saying, look,
There's
1.7 billion pounds for the road is a huge amount of money. If you say that needs to be delivered and the rail link needs to be delivered,
that's on a longer
where's
term,
the money going to come
from? On a longer term basis. Well, let me say this, Mark. In terms of the online strategic rail review, the executive already has a working strategy, but it's taking far too long to implement with the Irish government. The Irish government is running a significant surplus. The executive has borrowing powers that it hasn't fully implemented yet, it hasn't fully taken advantage of. This isn't going to happen in this budget. Of course, we don't even have a signed off budget for this year. This is going to take years, in fact, decades. This is about long-term infrastructure planning and saying we need this amount of money to deliver on the recommendations of the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review, baking it in over the next decade and a half, 2 decades. So no, the money is not there to build it this year, but we're not talking about building it this year. But the money is there to build the A5 and save lives. So that's what we need to do.
What about the issue of connectivity, and particularly making sure that people who live in the West are served better and businesses that operate in the West are served better as well? I mean, it's fine to talk about a better rail connectivity, but there isn't a great deal of freight that's going to be moved into the West and out of the West on a railway track that's going to be built in, 15, 20, knowing this place, 30 years down the line. I mean, people are looking for solutions today.
And Mark, and that's why we say move immediately to the safety upgrades. Actually, the future on this island should be moving more and more people into sustainable modes of transport. That means getting the train, getting the bus, and where they can.
Cars are cleaner as well, people will say. Does that not compensate
I think,
to some
Mark,
extent?
There's a narrative and there's been a policy drift in Northern Ireland for a number of decades where we have prioritised cars. And in parts of rural communities, the most vulnerable and poorest people cannot afford a family car. And particularly in this current cost of living crisis where we have escalating fuel prices, people are locked out of having cars. And the solution for so many of the executive parties is build a new road. And that privilege is only those people who can afford a car. Lots of other people can't, whereby everybody can afford rail or bus. And actually what we do, the safest form of transport is getting on a bus or getting on a train rather than necessarily taking a car.
Translink, which is our provider of public services, public service transport in Northern Ireland, is cutting back on services at the moment, not expanding them.
And that's because of political decisions made by the executive. You know, I look at the Green Party and the Republic when they were in government. They changed the
it's because there isn't enough money,
budget,
Mal.
and
that's why.
But Mark, we've had the whine of no money for a very, very long time in Northern Ireland. There's been no serious attempt from any of the executive parties, including Matthew's party when they were in the executive, to look at progressive taxation and ask those, because there are many people in Northern Ireland who are quite wealthy and doing pretty well, those people could pay a little bit more. None of the parties have ever had a serious approach on that.
That's not true, Matt.
That is very true, Mark. If you can name me a single progressive piece of taxation that your party has brought forward since 1998, it's never happened, never any proposal.
Absolutely
true.
It's absolutely not true. Like I'll send you an email after this to all the SDLP policy proposals we have published while we've been in opposition. I chair the finance committee.
While you're in opposition, Matthew, while you were in government.
Hang on. Well, it's been 25 years since we held the finance ministry, and when Mark Durkan held the finance ministry, we introduced a whole range of ambitious fiscal changes, including something called the Reform and Reinvestment Initiative, which was a borrowing power which enabled us to invest in water infrastructure much more than the Green Party's ever done. So don't come on here, Mal, and simply cast aspersions. Our party has delivered a huge amount in this space, and as an opposition, we have been to the fore at holding the executive's feet to the fire. But I think there is a reality check here that needs to happen. We have been robust in terms of challenging the executive parties around their failure on environmental issues. The tragedy, the shame of Lough Neagh and all of those things. But Mal, simply to tell people in County Tyrone who have watched their kids die, it's grand, we'll put in an extra train line, which should happen, but it's going to take, if we started literally today, it would take a decade and a half. So yes, it needs to happen, Mal, but grow up a little bit when you're talking about a road which is life-saving. We need to build that road. This isn't about building...
I'm not sure Mal would say that that's a fair characterisation of how he articulated his position. Just a quick response, Mal.
Yeah, and I would say very clearly, that, you know, every single one of those is those deaths is an avoidable tragedy. And actually, we have a terrible record of road deaths, not just on that road, but right across Northern Ireland. And yet this executive and the opposition continually pursue policy which incentivises people to use private car all the time.
Very quickly, do you want this to become an election issue over the next 11 months?
I think there's a wider conversation about how we prioritise transport and getting people around. The programme for government failed and said we will expand roads and we'll expand airports and said nothing on sustainable transport.
OK, I want to ask you about, as Leader of Stormont's Opposition, about the programme for government. And we heard this week from the First and Deputy First Ministers, in their view, the programme for government is delivering. Do you, Matthew O'Toole, share that assessment?
No, I don't, but I just want to say very clearly, on the environmental point and on the point about sustainable travel, Mal is completely wrong that his party are the only people who are championing this. Nicola Mallon is the person who commissioned the All-Ireland Strategic
Let's not go back over that.
We have championed active travel, and we have, Mal. So I'm afraid some of the aspersions you're casting today are false. But let me
Is the programme for government now delivering in your view?
No, absolutely not. It isn't. And the executive, I think, has demonstrably failed on a whole range of areas. They marked their own homework this week, and even they admitted that they weren't delivering. But I think what was particularly galling was to see a kind of 24-hour period where the First and Deputy First Minister were happy to do photo ops, but then immediately a day later they were back to being at one another's throats.
Okay.
There's such an incoherence there, a failure to deliver on the part of the executive, particularly the two big parties, who see a structural advantage in going at one another. But
they may well say, when they disagree, you criticise them, and then when they find reasons to agree, you criticise them.
Let's go back to the A5 issue, Mark. This is about joined up coherent government. If they had had a joined up coherent plan for how they were going to publish a climate action plan with a coherent strategy to meet our targets alongside delivering the A5, if they had done that in a joined up way, then we might not be in the situation that we're in at the minute.
I need to ask Mal a final question. Just on Lough Neagh, the Programme for Government review states that 20 of the 37 actions in the Lough Neagh Action Plan have been delivered, with the remainder currently being progressed. Is that how you see it?
No, I don't. And I think that the Lough Neagh Action Plan brought forward by Minister Muir was about education and awareness, where it should have been about enforcement and regulation. You know, we should have a moratorium of slurry spreading in the area of it. And, you know, Matthew would have us pretend that the SDLP suddenly are the party of the environment since going into opposition. But it was Minister Mallon for the SDLP who approved sand dredging at Lough Neagh, which has exacerbated the situation in Lough Neagh. And I worry it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I fear that we're going to see it spread over the next year.
We've also been challenging the executive and forced a reversal in position from executive parties on the Nutrients Action Plan. So I know Mal doesn't like the fact that we've been a serious, robust opposition in relation to environmental matters, but we have. Mal.
I don't think that's true.
OK, we've got to leave it there, folks. Frank exchange of views, always welcome in this programme. Matthew O'Toole, Mal O'Hara, thanks both very much indeed.